At first, I was actually thinking about doing kind of a tournament of weapons where you have like a roster and this weapon versus that, which is the winner, and then the winner moves on to the next round, and so on and so forth. But I think for now, we can just do kind of individual pairs, this versus that, and then we're going to look at the pros and cons and all of that. So should be interesting. So specific suggestions. What should we compare? Let's take a look at the chat here. Halberd versus quarterstaff. Yeah, you know what? Let's do that. So as far as use on the battlefield is concerned, halberd, of course, excellent. You have the blade, you can thrust with it, you can do so much more than with a quarterstaff. The quarterstaff does fine against an opponent with light armor, but the halberds are just going to do more damage easily. Against heavy armor, definitely halberd, no questions asked. I mean, again, you can batter somebody pretty good. You can bash the helmet with a quarterstaff. It is going to potentially knock them out. It's going to be effective, but halberd, yeah. Open space. Duel in an open space on even ground. They both are long, so the quarterstaff is going to be a little bit faster, for sure. The halberd is going to hit a lot harder and gives you more options. It's more versatile. So I would still have to give this to the halberd. Duel in confined space. Neither is good. In confined spaces, a pole is just bad news. If the halberd is longer than the quarterstaff, may be at an advantage, but on the other hand, on the halberd you have a point, so you can bring it in very close to your body and you can still work with a point. Self-defense against multiple attackers, easy. The quarterstaff is good, but the halberd is just gonna tear through them more effectively. Ease of carry. This is definitely where the quarterstaff wins. I mean, it's lighter. It doesn't have points and blades sticking out. It's a walking stick, basically. Easy. Durability and maintenance. Halberd requires more maintenance, but is going to last longer for the most part, because you can actually parry with the steel blade. You don't have to take everything on the wood of the staff. So, yeah. Harder to maintain, but definitely more durable. So I'd have to give this to the halberd. And then price is obvious. It's a stick. Overall, halberd wins. It's pretty easy. And you know what? I'm actually starting to think I should resize this. So Scott suggests basket hill broadsword versus infantry saber. Now we're getting into the finer nitty-gritty. Against light armor, I kind of want to say saber. A curved blade in a slicing motion does pretty well. Plus, sabers are usually more top-heavy than broadswords. So, in terms of cutting power, I think we can say against soft targets, probably the saber. Again, it depends very much on the individual type. There are sabers with relatively narrow blades that don't cut anywhere near as well. Against heavy armor, both kind of suck compared to a lot of other types. In this case, I would actually say it goes to the broadsword. Why? Not because you can cut through the armor, obviously, but because with a straight blade, you will have an easier time thrusting into the gaps of the armor. So you could actually half-sword the broadsword more easily and use that to exploit the weaknesses in the armor. Pretty freaking equal, I would say, whether you have a basket hill broadsword or a saber. If I would let just my personal bias and opinion speak, I would say the basket hill broadsword, because it gives you even more hand protection than the saber. Not much, to be fair, not much. But the broadsword is more agile generally. It's balanced closer to the hilt, usually, than a saber, and it's better at thrusts, I would say. Not that you can't thrust with a saber, but I think in terms of versatility, Like, personally, I would pick the broadsword. Let's put it that way. What do you guys think? Basket hilt broadsword is overall heavier than Sabre. I'm not sure I can agree with that. There's a lot of variation within broadswords and sabers. I've handled some really light broadswords. Let's see if I can't just throw a poll in here to let people decide. So 94 responses, 67% basket hilt broadsword. So you definitely think the broadsword wins over the infantry saber. Confined space. I mean, a lot of the same really applies here. In this case, they are very close to the same length, or at least similar, and it doesn't really make a difference. So this is just same result for duel in this case. I would say if it has the upper hand or even a slight advantage in a duel in an open space, it's going to be the same in confined space. In fact, potentially even more, because again, half swording is an option with a broadsword. Wasn't generally done with them, but you can potentially do that with a straight blade like that. You can technically do it with a curved blade too, it's just more difficult and not as versatile. Now, against multiple attackers, thrusts are not something you want to do against multiple attackers. And what you also don't want to do is get your sword stuck in someone or something. The broadsword would generally be more flexible for the most part, just because of the cross-section. And more flexible means that there is more chance for it to get stuck in a body or, against armor, etc. And I think with a curved blade, you can deliver cuts that are effective but don't penetrate extremely deeply necessarily, depending on how you use it. Sabre is probably the way to go. Ease of carry. Now this is going to be pretty equal. In terms of durability and maintenance, again, really, really similar. I don't see a big difference here. If one edge gets damaged or dulled to the point where it becomes difficult to use, or it becomes less effective to use, you still have another. At the same time, the shape of the hilt forces your hand into one position. So if you wanted to use the other edge, it will have to be a false edge cut. You can't just flip it around and use the false edge as the main cutting edge. So I don't think it matters in this case. Basket hilt broadsword versus infantry saber on price. I think the infantry saber can be produced at a lower price overall. It's a simpler shape. Like the hilt is just a little simpler, and the construction overall is just a bit simpler than the broadsword. Zweihander versus longsword. This should be quick. Zweihander is going to do more damage. We also shouldn't overestimate it. On the battlefield against heavy armor, you may think Zweihander because it hits harder, but then again, the longsword has half swording, thrusting into the gaps of the armor, which would be more difficult with the greatsword. I mean, you can still do it, but it's just that much more to handle. So it would be harder to control the point precisely and all of that. You have less space to work with. That's tricky. I'll take the ones that are easier. In open space, on even ground, easily the greatsword, just because it has all the reach, it has power. It makes it very hard to approach. Confined space, again, easy. I mean, come on. The huge sword is going to be at quite a disadvantage. Multiple attackers, easily, greatsword. That's one of its main benefits. Ease of carry, once again, easy. Longsword is going to be way simpler to carry. Durability and maintenance, I don't see that much of a difference. I mean, other than with the larger sword, there's more to oil and clean. So you could say maybe longsword has a bit of an advantage here, but not a whole lot really. Price, longsword is going to be a little bit cheaper. If you want to say just sheer power, just almost cleave them in half, then I guess that goes to the greatsword. I need to spend less time on each match because we're getting so many suggestions here. Let me just, for simplicity, just put in Viking sword. okay? Just so people know what is meant. Kyber sword. That's a difficult one. That's a really tricky one. I think I would probably give it to the Katar against light armor, just because you have that much more power. Like, you can punch really hard with that and it'll deliver the force very effectively. Against heavy armor, a lot of Katars actually have a reinforced tip to use against armor, against mail primarily. You could still thrust into the gaps of the armor. However, you have more options with a dagger, because you can hold the dagger in different ways. You can hold it tip up, tip down. You can change the grip depending on the situation, and you have more angles because the Katar is just fixed in alignment with your forearm. So the only way you can change the angle is by rotating either your elbow or your shoulder. You can't do it by rotating the wrist. So I think the dagger wins here just because of versatility. Open space, even ground. I would give it to the Katar here, I think, because you can parry with it better. I mean, even if we're not talking about a hooded Katar would be. But then again, if we look at a hooded Katar, we also have to look at like a left-hand dagger or something, like with a clamshell guard, so it's fair. So, but even then, I mean, you have the grip bars basically on the side of the Katar. They could actually be used to parry with. You don't have that with a dagger. And again, pretty powerful. Confined space. Both very good here. I would potentially, again, give it maybe to the dagger just because of, again, versatility and more different angles. I'll ask you folks again. People are saying dagger, like, by far. 81% say dagger and 18% say Katar. Where does the 1% always go? Oh well. Multiple attackers, I would give this one to the Katar, I think. Just because here, with a powerful punching thrust, I think it would actually be easier to just punch in, retract it immediately without it getting stuck, and just move on to the next attacker. I think in this way, yeah, I would give it to the Katar. Ease of carry, it's not a dramatic difference, but I would have to give it to the dagger. You can carry that in quite a number of ways. Katar's probably a little more limited. Daggers are cheaper in general. Katars can get pretty pricey. So overall, the dagger takes it, but not by much. Warhammer with top spike versus arming sword. Against light armor, I would give it to the sword, just because versatility and, ease of use and doesn't exhaust you as quickly. Heavy armor, that's a no-boner. I almost said a no-boner. I meant to say no-brainer, obviously. Okay, let's do this first. That's the easier one. Confined space, arming sword. Yeah. I mean, actually, it's not necessarily all that easy, because Warhammers tend to be shorter, and you can also choke up on it. So actually, you know what? It's not even that easy, really. I think a Warhammer would still do very well in confined space. The arming sword, of course, again, you can use half swording, you can use the point. The Warhammer has a point too, but it's just not going to be anywhere near as effective because you only have this much. And with a Warhammer, obviously, you can grip it anywhere you want. So I'm actually kind of tempted to give it to the hammer here in confined space, and to the arming sword in open space, because it has more reach. Ease of carry, that's pretty easy. Arming sword is easier to carry than a Warhammer. Durability and maintenance, there is not a whole lot of maintenance you have to do with a Warhammer, because even if it rusts, who cares? It's a solid hunk of steel and you don't have to maintain the edge or anything. The Warhammer has a wooden handle. I mean, some have steel handles too, but A lot of Warhammers that I've seen have steel langets, which make them much more durable. The hammer is also not going to get damaged as much as the arming sword, especially if those two collide. Yeah, the hammer is going to survive. For sure. The hammer is also cheaper. Now against multiple attackers, you can go either way, in my opinion. You can argue one way or the other. Hammer makes you slower a bit. If you do it right, if you keep using the momentum, like if you preserve the momentum of the hammer, you keep moving it around. In other words, if you have the endurance necessary to keep going like that, then it's not super slow. I mean, sure, the sword is faster, but it's not a dramatic difference, especially since Warhammers are not as heavy as people often think. You can deflect and parry with the arming sword. You can do that with a Warhammer too. It's that steel langets. The thing is, you could block a cut from an arming sword with a Warhammer, but you cannot block a strike from a Warhammer with an arming sword. So, it's a tricky one. 68% arming sword. All right. So you know what? I'll give it to the arming sword then against multiple attackers. So we're pretty even. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. If you want to say which is generally overall better, you could probably say the arming sword, because the Warhammer is more specialized. So in terms of versatility, the arming sword takes it. Now here it depends on which flail you're talking about, because it makes a massive difference if we're saying this. I'm gonna assume you mean the other type of flail with a longer chain and a ball at the end, because this is basically a longer nunchaku almost. So let's go with that. Let's say a flail as in Morning Star. Light armor, if you're wearing padding, the nunchaku isn't gonna do a whole lot. I mean, yeah, it's going to hurt, it's going to bruise, but I don't think you'll be able to really break bone with it. So the head would be the primary target, whereas with a flail, I mean, ow. It doesn't even matter where you hit. So here, against heavy armor, that's no competition, not even close. Open space, even ground. I'd have to give it to the flail again. Confined space, yeah, nunchaku, for sure. Multiple attackers, I would say flail. Ease of carry, nunchaku by far. Durability, flail is going to be able to take more abuse. I mean, both will, but potentially more for the flail. Might not make that much of a difference though. And price, well, that's simple. So I think overall, I would say give it to the flail. Espada y daga versus dadao. That's neither of those allow you to use a shield, which is something you normally want on a battlefield. I should focus more on that aspect as well, the ability to use a shield with various weapons. That makes quite a difference on the battlefield. Shield is good in general, either that or wear heavy armor. I do consider the dadao more of a battlefield weapon. Espada y daga is really more of a dueling sort of arrangement. So we go heavy armor, definitely dadao. Although, to be fair, you have a dagger to stab the gaps in the armor. But I think the dadao hits hard enough that you could strike with the spine and be pretty effective against armor. I think it just about takes it. But again, having the dagger is good against armor for sure. Okay, open space, yeah, reach, more reach. Confined space, that's easy. If you can't use the sword, you can use the dagger, for sure. Multiple attackers. Now, this is interesting. In some situations, if your one weapon is entangled or stuck even in one opponent, you still have another one, potentially, to defend yourself against another attacker. Ease of carry, Espada y daga. The dadao is one of those tank like swords. It's very sturdy, robust. So I'd have to give that to the dadao. Price, as far as reproductions are concerned, the dadao would be cheaper. Historically, dadao, super cheap, mass-produced. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the Espada daga, I think, was pretty cheap too, historically, but yeah, dadao would take that. 63% prefer Espada y daga over the dadao. All right. So you know what? I'm just gonna give it one here, just because, you know, the vote prefers the Espada y daga, and I do think they're both very viable here. I'm leaning toward multiple attackers, or toward Espada y daga here, but yeah, this one you could also, it's debatable. I mean, they're all debatable, obviously. This is not the be-all, end-all. I'll say messer here. Heavy armor. Yeah, montante. You can actually half sword with the montante pretty well. With a Kriegsmesser, not so much, because again, curved blade, you can do it to an extent, but it's a lot harder. Yeah, open space, even though that's easy. Reach and power win. Confined space, that's again easy. Multiple attackers, that's literally what the montante was designed for, among other things. That was like its primary use. Ease of carry, again easy. Durability and maintenance, they're going to be very similar here, aside from the fact that the larger sword is a bit more of a pain in the ass to maintain. I mean, to clean, keep clean and oil, but it's not really enough to give the edge to one or the other. Messer should be cheaper though. So Messer just about wins, but not by much. Spear versus pike. In this case, I would probably have to say spear, because a fish isn't very useful in combat, right? Let's put it this way. If we have two formations, one pike formation and one spear formation, the pike formation is probably going to wreck the spears. So I think on the battlefield we can just hand it to the pike, just straight up. In a duel, I mean, confined space, yeah, spear. Obviously, the pike is, you wouldn't even fit the pike into a confined space. It doesn't even, you can't. Unwieldy compared to a spear that I don't think it does well outside of a formation. So there is that. Ease of carry, easily. Spear would also be, no wait, spear would be cheaper. Pike is probably more durable though, just because it's more massive. Multiple attackers. If you're dealing with somebody who is far enough away that you can actually poke them with a point, then the others can probably just run around you and flank you or attack you from the sides or whatever. So you would be kind of screwed in that way. So the pike would be just the battlefield choice, but the spear for everything else, really. Quarterstaff versus bowstaff. I think I can just do this quickly. Personally, I prefer the quarterstaff because it's longer and thicker usually. And yeah, more reach, hits harder. But of course, confined space, bow might be a little better. There's that. Okay, so Falx versus katana. If it was unarmored, I'd give it to the katana here. Light armor, though. The Falx wrecks armor. We know that. But the katana is also very good against light armor. I mean, if you have something like a gambeson, katana will do just fine. Because of the ability to use thrusts, I will give it to the katana here. And then against heavy armor, I will give it to the Falx, because the katana against heavy armor is kind of gets damaged easily and can't really have sword with it very well. Katana may have a little more reach. Generally, the Falxes, if that's the plural, that I've seen so far, have a relatively short-ish blade. Longer handle, though. The katana has a guard at all. It's a small one, but it does have one. Confined space, I'd have to say katana, because, you know, the almighty EI. Multiple attackers, yeah, give me a Falx. Personally. I mean, it's more likely to get stuck. I'll say that. But I think if you were to strike with the spine of a Falx, that would be more effective than with a katana. If you're dealing with multiple attackers, you may end up in situations where you're under heavy pressure and you have to react very quickly in a suboptimal way, and the Falx is easier to use. You just lash out at them, you just hit them with a point, and yeah, it'll wreck them. I find a katana is easier to draw. The Falx is a bit of a hassle to draw out of its scabbard. Durability, well, okay, now it depends. Are we talking modern reproductions or are we talking originals? Because original Falx was made of, I think, of iron. Durability is not the katana strength, I would say, unless it's made of modern crucible steel. If you lose the edge completely, like if you have so much edge damage that it won't cut at all, you can still use the Falx because you can still kind of tear and cut with just a point. If the katana loses its edge completely, it's basically just a metal bar. So I would give that to the Falx and the price, because katanas are rather pricey. Yeah, what do we do with this here? What does the poll say? 70% katana. You're a bunch of weebs. Just kidding, of course. But yeah, 70% prefer the katana. Yeah, in light of that poll result, I'll just give it to the katana here. In terms of versatility, the katana takes it home here, I think. The Falx is more specialized. I'm just going to say the Rapier is not a battlefield weapon. It was never designed as such. It doesn't really work well on the battlefield. Sword and buckler can be used on the battlefield and was. Open space, potentially Rapier and Dagger, because Rapier thrusts can be very quick, difficult to deal with, a lot of reach. Confined space is easily sword and buckler, no question. Well, okay, maybe not easily. It depends a little bit on in which direction it's confined. If you're in like a long hall where you're confined on the sides by the walls, but back and forth you have plenty of space, then Rapier and Dagger still does very well. The Dagger is also going to be very useful. Multiple attackers. This is where the Rapier is not good. You don't want to thrust at multiple attackers. Easily sword and buckler. Ease of carry, Rapier and Dagger. Definitely. Longer blade, but carrying the buckler is a bit of a pain. Sword and buckler on durability and maintenance, probably a little bit better. Just a little bit. Also with regards to the fact that keeping a complex hilt clean and rust-free is a bit of a challenge compared to just a standard cruciform sword. A good point here, Rapier beats sword in confined space because the Rapier's thrust can be used fully. It would be hard to dodge while the sword cannot properly cut without hitting the walls. That is true. You can thrust with the sword just fine, of course, but yeah. And you do have the Dagger. The Dagger is very useful in confined space. So you know what? Let's give it to the Rapier and Dagger for confined space. So yeah, what do you think? Would you like me to do this sort of thing more often, where we focus on different things like ranged weapons, firearms, etc., maybe with different categories, stuff like that? Sounds good. So thank you everybody for showing up. Thank you very much for all the super chats. Highly appreciated. Helps out. And yeah, again, consider becoming a patron. So then you can actually get announcements for stuff like this in advance before it happens. And you can also get all the recorded versions of live streams, etc. Whereas in cases like this, most of the live streams I put unlisted as bonus content for patrons. So yeah, thank you. See you next time and have a good one, folks.